Did you really read every line of your divorce agreement? Or did you breeze past the fine print that could drain your bank account for years to come? Imagine signing off on what you thought was a fair split, only to discover later that tiny clauses buried in the paperwork quietly siphon off your savings, retirement funds, and future income without you ever realizing. In this video, we're pulling back the curtain on 10 financial provisions so subtle they often slip past even the most diligent review, only to leave you scrambling when the bills arrive. You'll learn how harmless language about joint debts can turn into a recurring nightmare, why that clause about life insurance riders can lock you into skyrocketing premiums, and how deferred payment schedules can shrink your settlement before it's even in hand. I've seen countless women walk away thinking they've protected their nest egg, only to face surprise audit fees, vanishing spousal support, and credit disputes that eat into every last dollar. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which red flag phrases to watch for, what questions to demand answers to, and how to fight back before you sign your name. Stick around, because missing just one of these hidden traps could cost you far more than your legal fees. Let's dive in and make sure you don't let the fine print rob you of the financial security you deserve. When you see the words, "Each party shall remain jointly responsible for all marital debts," it might sound like a fair split. After all, you share the obligations you created together, right? But buried in that seemingly balanced statement is a time bomb. Any account that slips past your notice, credit cards from a business expense you forgot, medical bills from last-minute emergencies, instantly becomes your responsibility too. Imagine your ex charging a large purchase the week before signing, thinking you won't catch it until the bill arrives months later. Because the clause doesn't specify dates or limits, you're left holding the bag long after the ink has dried. Your credit score dips, late fees pile up, and you scramble to prove you weren't the one who ran up the debt in the first place. Even if you eventually win reimbursement through a court motion, the damage to your credit and finances is already done. Next time you review that agreement, demand precise language. Define the cutoff date, list every account you're splitting, and carve out any debts incurred after separation. Otherwise, you're signing up for a recurring surprise that can bleed your savings dry. But that's just the beginning. Up next is a clause so innocuous it often hides inside life insurance provisions, quietly inflating your premiums for years to come. When your divorce settlement insists you carry a permanent life insurance policy naming your ex as beneficiary, it sounds like a simple safety net, until the premiums start skyrocketing. Take Sarah, who agreed to keep a $500,000 whole life policy in force for the duration of her alimony obligation. At first, the monthly cost was manageable, but within 3 years, the insurer jacked up her premiums by 40%. Cancel the policy, or let it lapse, and she'd be in contempt of court, risking fines or even jail time. Behind that clause lies a bitter truth. Permanent policies aren't cheap, and your ex holds all the leverage. They don't have to pay a dime toward premiums, yet they reap the benefit if something happens to you. Meanwhile, you're stuck footing an ever-rising bill that can wipe out emergency savings or force you to borrow just to stay in compliance. Even worse, most settlements don't spell out review dates, so you end up locked into a policy that might no longer fit your budget or health situation. To stop this drain, insist on a term policy with premiums fixed for a set period, or cap the maximum you'll pay each year. And carve in a review point. Say, every 5 years, so you can adjust coverage as your financial needs change. Otherwise, that protection clause could quietly bleed your wallet long after you think it's settled. But that wasn't the whole story. Next, we'll uncover the clause that can stealthily drain half of your retirement nest egg. Ever signed off on shared responsibility for marital debts only to find yourself on the hook for every late fee and interest hike? That's exactly how Anna got trapped. Her divorce papers said she'd assume half of all joint obligations, so she dutifully took on the household credit cards, until her ex maxed them out on a new car and a luxury vacation. Suddenly, Anna was responsible for a 6-figure balance she had nothing to do with. This clause seems fair on paper, splitting debts 50-50, but in practice it hands full control to whichever spouse is less scrupulous. They can run up charges, miss payments, or even open new lines in your name, and you're legally obligated to cover your share. Meanwhile, your credit score takes a beating, your interest spirals, and your financial future looks bleaker by the month. To protect yourself, demand a clear carve-out. Only pre-divorce debts you both acknowledge in writing, capped at a specific dollar amount, and with an audit clause requiring your ex to provide statements before you pay a dime. Better yet, insist each of you retains sole responsibility for your own credit cards, with any joint debt paid off in full before the decree is final. That way, you won't wake up to a surprise bill that drains your savings. But that wasn't the whole story. Up next, we'll reveal the hidden retirement clause that could strip away your nest egg faster than you think. Ever glanced at your retirement plan only to discover it's being drained by a QDRO oversight? That's what happened to Marisol when her ex failed to secure a qualified domestic relations order, leaving her unable to touch her 401k without a penalty. Months later, she faced surprise taxes, early withdrawal fees, and a hefty legal bill just to claw back what was rightfully hers. A missing or improperly drafted QDRO can turn your future savings into someone else's power play. Without that court order, the plan administrator won't honor the split you negotiated. Instead, any attempt to access funds triggers IRS penalties, and your ex can stall you with paperwork delays. All that time, the account balance shrinks under market swings, while you're forced to watch from the sidelines. The fix is straightforward but non-negotiable. Insist on a fully executed QDRO before finalizing the divorce. Have your attorney draft it, your plan administrator review it, then file it with the court. If there's any confusion about retirement vehicles, IRAs, pensions, stock options, spell out each one by name, account number, and dollar split. Only when that document is signed, approved, and back in your hands should you consider the decree complete. And that wasn't the worst clause hiding in the fine print. Up next, learn how a simple alimony duration cap can leave you stranded without a penny when you need support most. When you think alimony will last until you get back on your feet, a hidden sunset clause can leave you high and dry. That's exactly what happened to Dana, who agreed to 10 years of spousal support, only to find her payments abruptly cut off in year 6 because of a review provision buried in Section 12.3. She'd assumed ongoing support meant ongoing support, but that clause let her ex petition the court to end payments early. A sunset clause like this gives one side the power to trigger a review or automatic termination once certain conditions are met: remarriage, cohabitation, or a lump sum threshold. Suddenly, you're scrambling to cover childcare, rent, and everyday bills without warning. Meanwhile, your ex is free to move on without financial obligation. It's a knockout blow you never saw coming. To guard against this drain, demand clear, unambiguous language. Spell out exact start and end dates, define any review triggers in plain English, and strike any automatic termination triggers you can. If negotiations stall, offer a fixed term instead of vague, until further order language. Have your attorney flag every reference to review, renewal, or termination, and cross-check them against your understanding. But that wasn't the whole story. Coming up, we'll reveal how an equity carve-out in your home valuation can quietly bleed away thousands more. Imagine thinking you've secured half the equity in your family home, only to discover a carve-out buried in Section 14.2 that whittles away your share before the ink is even dry. That equity carve-out lets your ex deduct specific costs, real estate commissions, repairs, even property taxes, from the sale proceeds before splitting the balance. On paper, you're promised 50%. In practice, you're left with whatever's left after a referee-approved accounting. Take Maria. She agreed to equal division, confident her freshly remodeled kitchen would boost her payout. Instead, every dollar she spent on upgrades was added back to the carve-out ledger. By closing day, her ex walked away with nearly 60% of the net proceeds, and Maria was stuck covering a hefty unexpected bill. To prevent this stealth drain, demand that the agreement caps carve-out deductions at a fixed dollar amount or percentage, and requires mutual approval of any expense listed against the home's value. Insist on a joint appraisal pre-sale and a cleanup clause that disallows retroactive repairs charged against your equity. And if your lawyer balks, push for language that explicitly ties your share to gross sale price, not the murky net. But that wasn't the whole story. Up next, you'll learn how retirement accounts can vanish overnight if you overlook the QDRO trap. Your ex's life insurance policy might look like a safety net, but buried in Section 17.4 is a clause that lets them switch beneficiaries the moment they please, leaving your children with nothing if something happens. This beneficiary change provision often goes unnoticed until it's too late, turning what should be guaranteed support into an empty promise. Consider Emily, who believed her ex would keep their joint policy intact after divorce. 6 months later, he quietly named his new partner as primary beneficiary. And when he passed unexpectedly, Emily's 2 kids were left scrambling for legal help, only to learn the policy paid out entirely to someone else. Not only did she lose the payout, but legal fees ate up months of her time and savings. To lock down real protection, Insist on adding an irrevocable beneficiary designation naming you, or better yet, a trust for your kids, as primary. Include language that prohibits any change without your written consent. Require your ex to provide proof of policy and premium payments annually, and add a penalty for missed payments so the policy can't lapse unnoticed. And what happens if they refuse? Be prepared to threaten a contempt motion. Courts rarely ignore blatant breaches of agreed terms. But hold on, up next, you'll discover how an overlooked tax reimbursement clause could cost you thousands each year. That fine print, dispute resolution line tucked into Article 22 doesn't just dictate courtroom versus arbitration. It quietly forces you into a high-cost process every time you challenge your ex, from simple payment hiccups to filing basic financial disclosures. Most women assume they'll have a judge to enforce promises, but here they find themselves trapped in private arbitration, paying steep filing fees, mediator costs, and hourly rates that can run hundreds of dollars. Take Sarah, who spotted a missed child support payment and sent a polite reminder, only to be met with a referral to arbitration. She ended up owing thousands just to recover what was already hers, draining her savings and making her think twice before enforcing any provision again. To avoid this trap, insist on striking the arbitration clause altogether or replacing it with a court of competent jurisdiction provision. If your ex resists, negotiate a cap on fees and require the arbitrator to award costs to the prevailing party. That way, you won't be punished for standing up for your rights. And coming up next, you'll learn about the hidden tax reimbursement clause that could leave you owing the IRS instead of collecting what you deserve. Buried in Clause 35 is a penalty for premature modification that hits like a hidden tax when you try to adjust support or property splits. Instead of a simple hearing, this clause slaps on a flat fee plus a percentage of the amount in dispute, often thousands of dollars, whenever either party proposes a change. Imagine realizing your mortgage payment soared and you need more spousal support, only to learn you owe an extra 5% of the total increase just for asking. Laura faced this when her cost of living rose and her attorney warned that even filing a motion to revisit spousal support would trigger a $3,000 penalty before any judge ever saw her case. That shocker kept her from seeking adjustments she desperately needed. To protect yourself, demand that any modification motions follow standard court rules with no added surcharge, or negotiate a reasonable flat fee that applies equally to both sides. And if that fails, push for a sunset on the penalty after 2 years. Enough time to settle in but not forever punishing you for life's inevitable twists. Next, we'll uncover how the life insurance offset clause can quietly erode the very safety net you thought you built into your divorce. The final pitfall hides in what looks like a simple tax provision but functions as a silent wealth siphon: the gross-up clause. It promises to cover any tax liability on assets you receive. Sounds fair, right? The catch is the fine print forces you to repay your ex for every dollar they shell out so you don't lose money to Uncle Sam. Imagine expecting a clean split of your investment account, only to discover you owe a hidden bill to your former spouse because they claimed a deduction on transferring those assets. Sarah thought she'd walked away with half of her 401k, but when tax time came, her ex sent an invoice for the tax benefit he'd gained, nearly $4,500, leaving her scrambling to cover the shortfall. This gross-up mechanism not only erodes your settlement but also ties you to unexpected future liabilities. To neutralize this trap, insist on capping any gross-up at a fixed dollar amount or tying repayment to actual tax liability rather than an assumed benefit. Better yet, negotiate to replace it with a simple, hold harmless agreement. Each party assumes their own taxes, period. By stripping out the gross-up or at least containing its scope, you can protect yourself from a surprise bill that chips away at your financial security long after the divorce papers are signed. Now that you've seen all 10 clauses, from hidden escalation formulas to surprise liability shifts, it's clear just how easy it is to unknowingly give up more than you bargained for. These provisions don't just sit on paper. They quietly siphon off your savings, claw back your assets, and leave you scrambling years later when you thought the settlement was final. But awareness is power. Before you sign on the dotted line, take a moment to breathe and run every clause past someone you trust. An advocate who will flag the loopholes you might overlook. Remember, you don't have to accept standard language that bleeds your nest egg. Cap those gross-ups, swap joint debt clauses for fixed splits, demand transparency on valuation dates, and refuse any open-ended tax guarantees. By insisting on clear limits and dollar caps, you stop the erosion of your wealth before it starts. Divorce is hard enough without hidden financial landmines detonating long after you think you're free. Arm yourself with knowledge, push back on one-sided terms, and negotiate for fairness that lasts. Your future self will thank you for protecting today's hard-earned assets, and for walking away with not just peace of mind, but the financial freedom you deserve.